All right, let's look at today at what should be the primary key. Or another way of saying this is, when should I have a primary key that is non-clustered, which actually is a common misconception in SQL Server. While it's certainly not an interview question that I would ask, it's a good interview question to ask, which is, can a primary key be non-clustered? Because the answer is yes, it can. So let's look at a really quick example here that I provided in another video. Let's suppose, and let's look at the table Bitcoin timetable 1. And let's imagine a scenario in which we're going to, and I've seen this a lot, where what we're going to do is we're going to add a column to this table, and we're going to call the column ID, and we're going to make that column an identity 11, and we're going to say that that identity column is going to be the primary key. And this is something I've seen with a lot of developers where they just go to a default ID field, and that's because it's easy in the sense that it can be unique. Obviously, it's going to be incrementing each time. It's not going to be the same. It's almost convenient to do. Here's the problem: almost all of their queries don't involve that column. In fact, a lot of the cases that I'm thinking of right now with several different developers I can think of, they never even use the column at all. So they're making their primary key column something that they don't even use in their queries. And the reason why I use this example with the Bitcoin table is because Bitcoin time, fundamentally, if I am getting the Bitcoin price at different times, it's stupid to get it at the same time because that doesn't even make any sense. That makes the most sense for a primary key in this case, because I only want to, first of all, know two things, so there's no reason to add more data that aren't necessary. Two, if I needed to get some type of order, for instance, if I needed, let's say, a field that was an integer field, I could always use dense rank, row number, those tools to order it by, of course, the Bitcoin time, and then I could do some further analysis. Of course, one of the more bizarre things to me is that there are a lot of people who have those fields who don't even use them, even though they could for that type of analysis. Okay. So the point is that going back to this, of course, is that adding a clustered index primary key as an ID does not give me any wins for what I'm going to primarily be using this table for. It's primarily going to be the Bitcoin time. Now, we all know that the Bitcoin price, or most people I should say know, that that's not unique. There are many times where Bitcoin has been the same price in the last, 6 years that it's been out. So it can be the same price. That's not going to be a unique value at all by any stretch of the imagination. So when you have a strong understanding of what your queries will be looking for, you can then determine what makes the best clustered index. Okay, a primary key can be a non-clustered index. It's true, it can. That doesn't mean that choosing a non-clustered index for a primary key, though, is a good choice. In fact, it's not, right? Generally. Always consider three major pieces when choosing your primary key clustered column. Number one, fill factor settings. Number two, page splits. And then, of course, fragmentation. In the case of the latter two, less is more. You don't want a lot of page splits. You don't want a lot of fragmentation, right? In the case of the first, you're seeking something that doesn't need to be reset, right? Your primary key column you should not be changing the fill factor settings to the primary key column. Once you pick what it's going to be, if you have to go back in and change those settings right off the bat, you haven't picked the right column, okay? This is something that, for the most part, shouldn't be touched. Once it's set, it's set. So that means you really want to think about that. And, of course, I put here my least favorite column choice for primary key clustered columns is the ID field, because most of the times it's just simply not used. It amazes me how many developers pick that, but then they just never use it. And there are other choices. So it's not to say that an ID column would not make a good choice, but it's something that you should really think about. Like, what fundamentally are you going to be querying with these data? And when you understand that, then you'll know which column is the best. And then, of course, finally here, the clustered index is one of the most important pieces when we're talking about the speed of obtaining data. So it is something that you should put some thought into, and it is something that you should imagine what queries are going to be used against the table, whatever it is. In the case of, if we go to this example, the Bitcoin price and the Bitcoin time is going to be one of the big filters there. Okay, I'm going to be looking for what was the Bitcoin price between this time. It's just going to be one of the big pieces, okay? It's the same thing if you have the popular example as AdventureWorks in a sales table. Well, what primarily are you going to be looking for in your sales table? What is that filter going to be? What are those filters going to be? And which of those columns makes most sense for the primary key? So choosing identity field, or I'm sorry, an ID field, I get it, it's the default choice most of the time, but the question is, does it actually fit that data set?